So this is the second of my two-part video that covers what I'm going to sow and grow in December and January. This is the second part, so this covers what I'm going to sow and grow in January. Let's take a look. This database that I'm using on my iPad here, you can take a look at this view that I'm looking at, and I'll put links to it in the description bar down below. And there is an old version of this database that is available as well if you want to sort of download that and play around with it. But I am working on a new version of this database, which is built off the current version that I'm using. And hopefully that'll be ready for next year's sort of growing season, which sort of February time. You might want to wait for that. So what have we got here? So we've got red cabbage. So last year I tried red cabbage in January and it worked really well. I was very pleased with it. And I'm looking for a harvest sort of August time with that. And, you know, maybe you could get red cabbage similar sort of time without starting it this early. But I don't know, I've got quite a lot of space kind of opening up, because at the moment I've got quite a lot of space dedicated to things like lettuce, spring onions, brassica, you know, leafy greens, chard, kales, spinach, all those sorts of things, Asian greens. And, you know, you need a lot of those for eating over winter. But once you kind of get to March time, you just don't need anywhere near as much space for all of those things, because everything's growing so much faster than it is over winter. So I get a lot of space opening up on the allotment. And I need to fill that space because I always like to have living roots in the soil, and obviously I want to eat stuff. So I'm looking for the best things to grow in that period. And as I say, red cabbages seem to do quite well. And I'm also overwintering red cabbages for an even earlier harvest. So I harvest in kind of June sort of time, which will be really nice, because June is a time when, you know, it's quite hard to have a really nice range of different brassicas. So yeah, I'm quite excited about that. And of course I've got lots of cauliflowers and things like that as well for sort of May and June, and lots of calabrese and purple sprouting broccoli. So, you know, that whole kind of hungry gap period, April, May, June, for us is really, really productive. And we have such a wonderful range of food because of all this overwintering that I do. Anyway, other thing is it's really nice to do some kale. If you've got a low tunnel, it's not really worth putting in a polytunnel, I don't think, but if you've got a little low tunnel cloche or something like that, or even just fleece, then you can start kales under grow lights in January and then plant them out in March, as I say, under fleece or something, and you just get a really nice early harvest. About late April time is when I tend to find that I'm starting to harvest it, and that is really nice because I'm starting to pull old kales out at that point because they're all going to seed, and I need that space for new season crops. So the best by far of the kales to do early, I find, are the green curly kales, things like reflex, dwarf greens. They don't tend to go to seed. What you will find, whenever you start something a little bit early, it will go to seed also a little bit early. So, you know, you just have to bear that in mind. And I tend to find that kales that are started in January, planted out in March, will go to seed about sort of June time. So you want to plan on having a follow-on crop ready to go in that bed. And I actually find things like purple sprouting broccoli ideal for that, because it's a brassica following a brassica, which is fine though, because it's just in 1 year. And so, yeah, I find it's really good because when you put the kale in, it kind of prepares the ground for the follow-on brassica crop, and it prepares it in terms of like the soil microbiota kind of adjust to having a brassica growing in there, and then it's all ready and primed for the next brassica that comes along in July sort of time. I also like to do scarlet, which is kind of a reddy kale, and I just like that because it's just so beautiful, but it does go to seed a bit earlier. So you just have to bear that in mind. So I will only probably do like a quarter of the bed will be this red scarlet kale, and then 3/4 will be a mix of dwarf green and reflex. So as I mentioned earlier, I was going to do a batch of carrots in November. I decided not to do those. I'm going to do them in January instead, and I'm going to just start them for 10 days or thereabouts in the conservatory. You do just need to keep an eye on them though, because as soon as they break surface, you need to get them into the light, because otherwise they'll be really leggy and weak, and obviously you don't want leggy, weak carrots, although they will probably recover, but best not trying. So I'll do another batch of salad onions, and this is probably the last batch of Leela. I love Leela, it's one of my absolute favourite salad onions, but the only issue with it is that it will start to bulb, because it is a bulbing onion. It will start to bulb in May, and I like my salad onions nice and thin. So if you kind of do Leela too late, then you'll find that it's not really ready until it's starting to bulb. And if you like your salad onions big, then Leela is great for that, although it will also probably go to seed because it's been started early. But anyway, probably my last batch of the red salad onions, and then I'll switch to something like Guardsman, you know, traditional green salad onion, and then I'll grow that all the way through spring, and I'll switch back to these red ones to eat over winter and that. So next up is graffiti. It's my absolute favourite cauliflower to grow, and it does, or it seems to do, really, really well really early. The only thing is it's an F1, and that means they all grow kind of at an identical rate. So they all come ready at exactly the same time, which is really annoying, especially if you grow, you know, like 6 of them or something. You end up with 6 cauliflowers to eat in a 2-week period, which is, yeah, it's really annoying. So I'm only going to do 4, and I'm going to do 4 every 2 weeks for, you know, a couple of months. And I'm going to plant probably 3 of those 4. I'll probably give one away because they're so popular with people. Everybody loves them. And they're quite expensive seeds as well. So I don't want to do too many, but then, you know, I find that about 3 is enough to cover that 2-week period. And I'll do some spinach. Always doing spinach, you know, because you can never get enough spinach. But also, the overwinter spinach will start to go to seed. Everything's going to seed in spring, of course. And so you need another batch of spinach to make sure you've kind of got a follow-on continuous supply of it. Otherwise, all your overwinter stuff will go to seed, and then all your kind of spring-sown stuff won't be ready yet, and so you have a big gap of spinach, and we hate to have a gap of anything. So it's worth starting some of that in sort of mid-January time, and then it'll give us a nice continuous harvest period, and then we'll keep on doing a few more batches of spinach as we go through into February and March, and probably April as well. And then I'm also going to start my first batch of peas, and I think this year I've tried all sorts of different ones. I did a lot of sugar snaps last year, but I think by far the most popular are the Mange 2, and obviously they're also the earliest ones, and since we're doing an early batch of peas, it makes sense to do an early variety of peas. And you know, so something like Oregon Sugar Pod, it's nice and early, you can eat everything, you don't have to wait for the actual pea to develop. Of course, it's all harvested before pea moth arrives as well, which means you don't have to worry about eating it fresh and getting a moth in your mouth, or moth grub in your mouth. So yes, the way that I do these peas is I just do them at the back of a low tunnel. So I take about, how much space? Sort of this sort of space, probably that. So it's about a foot, isn't it? About 30 centimetres of a foot of a low tunnel. And I put 2 canes in, and I wind string around those canes, and then I grow just 1 or 2 rows of peas at the back of the low tunnel between the strings, and little posts about, you know, this sort of high, so they'll fit under the low tunnel. And they just grow So I'm starting them 16th of January. Doesn't really matter if exactly mid-January. And I'll be planting them out about mid-February, I guess, about a month old. And they will grow underneath the low tunnel, at the back of the low tunnel, so the north side of the low tunnel, until they kind of reach the top of the canes. And I'll keep putting strings in to support them. And by about April time, they've outgrown the low tunnel. Obviously, I can open the low tunnel, give them a bit more space, but they'll basically have outgrown it about April time. So at the front of them, you have to plant something that is going to be fine outside in April. So lettuce and spinach, basically, are really good things to not interplant with the peas, but plant in front of the peas so they don't cast any shadow on the peas. And then the peas, as they grow, obviously don't cast any shadow on the lettuces. So it's an ideal companion plant, I guess. And yeah, just take the low tunnel off and then put the low tunnel over something that really wants it in April. And, you know, who knows what that might be, because I don't sort of plan that level of detail. But then we'll be harvesting the first of those Mange 2 peas about mid-May. And that is a kind of real delight for me because they're beautiful and sweet and crisp. And I won't have had any peas since, well, we've still got peas now, just going into December. But they're not really sweet, and they're not Mange 2 either. So basically from, you know, December through to mid-May, I won't have eaten any peas. So I'm really, really looking forward to them. And that is one of the real beauties of growing seasonally, is that, and being self-sufficient, is that you just really, really look forward to the first harvest of everything. It just brings a lot of joy to my life, I've got to say. So, next up, my next batch of peppers. And again, I'm not going to do very many. I'm only going to do a quarter of them again. And I'm only doing the sweet peppers this time. Because I only do one batch in December of the chili peppers because we don't need very many of them. And I'm going to do California Wonder, Long Yellow Ringo, Red King, and I might, maybe not actually, I was going to say I might do some lunchbox ones, but I think I'll leave those till February because I'm going to do the other half of my peppers, so most of them I will do in February. And the reason I split them like that, quarter, half, is because of space. If I did all of them back in December, I would just have no space to move in my conservatory. I would just it'd be peppers everywhere, basically. It would be a right old mess. And also I'd be taking a massive risk when I plant them out, because this early batch will have to be planted out in sort of mid-May. And we still have quite a few frosts potentially in mid-May. And you've got to keep those peppers above 11 degrees. So really, you don't want to be planting anything out unless the weather forecast shows 11 degrees at night for the foreseeable future. And, you know, that is just not, it's a big risk to take with all of your peppers. But taking that risk with 25% of your peppers is not a huge risk, because you can put loads of fleece over it and all of that sort of thing. You can just basically do a few things to try and keep them above 11 degrees. And if you can't keep them above 11 degrees, it's not a total disaster. It's not like they're going to die. It's just you're going to reduce your harvest, your long-term harvest off them, you know, because the plants just won't be as healthy. And that doesn't matter for 25%. And the other 25% and the other half, they will come ready for planting towards the end of May. And if I really needed to keep them in the conservatory for another week or 2 weeks or something like that, I'd have space to be able to do that. But I just wouldn't have space to do that for all of them if I started them in December. Right, so next one up is beetroot. Now we have loads of beetroot in store. Beetroot is a fabulous veg for storage. We store it in damp wood chip. We've got about 5 big tubs of it at the moment. Of course, we've got loads of it in the ground as well. So at the moment, we're just eating it fresh from the ground. But once you get into, you know, January sort of thing, you know, the quality starts to decline. Slugs and snails start eating it, you know, and all this sort of thing. So it's nice to have it in store. And of course, I need the space for other things. I don't want just space being used for beetroot when it could just be picked and stored in a box. So I like to start some beetroot nice and early for a harvest about mid-May, which is when I run out of the stuff in store. And I also find that mid-May is about the time at which the quality of the stuff in store starts to decline a little bit. So yeah, it's a good timing. And for that, I'm choosing Pablo. And Pablo is great. It's better than Bolt Hardy. It comes a few weeks earlier than Bolt Hardy, so it's a nice fast grower. But it also just never gets woody. We've had it really big, this sort of size, and it's still, super sweet and tender, not a hint of woodiness in it. So you can just start it early and just leave it growing and just keep on harvesting it as you need it. So where am I going to put it? Well, I like to just put it at the back of the low tunnels. So in the same way that I put peas at the back of my low tunnels, I put beetroot at the back of the low tunnels that are going to have peppers in them. And the peppers get planted kind of in the middle of the low tunnels, and the beetroot are at the back of the low tunnels. And by the time the peppers are casting any kind of shade over the beetroot's nice and big. It's getting plenty of light, it's got loads of leaf, but it's at the back, so it's not shading the peppers. It's just a great interplant. And of course, the beetroot, although people say it's a cold weather or a cool weather plant, it loves the heat. It really loves the heat at the back of these low tunnels. And so it just grows really, really well. And say it grows really, really big, and you just don't have to worry about it. We were harvesting it all the way through July, and it was just fine. So that's great. I also put a little bit in the polytunnel, again, kind of the edges of my beds for an even earlier harvest. And then also in January, mid-January, that's when I start my first radishes. Now, certainly perfectly possible to grow radishes right through winter under grow lights, but what I find is that the texture of them is not really good enough for me, because they just like it a bit cooler than grown in the house under grow lights. So they tend to be a bit spicy, a little bit spongier, not as crisp and fresh tasting as if you'd grown them outside. But I will just start them under grow lights. And normally I think, how many days do I give them? 14 days, I think. I've got one here that says 25, but I don't. I only give them 14 days. So 14 days after germination, and they're ready for planting out. And then about 2 months later, they're ready for harvest. So I will do 2 batches. One will go outside, interplanted into, say, a spinach bed or something like that. And then the other one will go into the polytunnel. The one in the polytunnel will come ready first, and then the next batch will come ready. And we just keep on doing radishes then all the way through until about, I don't know, late May or something like that. And then I stop, because I don't really like radishes in summer. They're just really difficult to grow well, and I'm absolutely fed up with them by then anyway. And then we do the lettuce, first batch of lettuces, and then this batch generally goes into the polytunnel, and it replaces the old Asian green beds. So all the Asian greens have been eaten all the way through winter. They're starting to all go to seed come sort of February time. So I want these lettuces to go into that bed, and there's plenty of time then to get a lettuce harvest out before I need to plant the tomatoes and the peppers into the polytunnel. So that's a really nice timing for me, and it means that the main lettuce bed in the polytunnel, I can start interplanting other things into that bed. And often I like to put some brassicas and things like that in there for a nice harvest in sort of early May kind of time. So things like calabrese and things like that, get a really nice harvest from. And leeks. So just like I don't do early main crop onions, I also don't do early main crop leeks, but I do a few leeks just for a harvest in summer. I think that's worth starting those off. But most of my leeks, I don't start off until March. They've got loads and loads of time to grow. It's just really, you just grow unhealthy leeks again, basically, if you start them too early. However, I do start my shallots a little bit earlier. I found that shallots are slightly slower growing, the Ceylon shallots. And so about the end of January, so about 2 weeks before my main crop onions, I'll do these shallots. And I like to interplant my shallots into my early parsnip beds, and I'll be planting out my early parsnips in sort of March time, early March. And so I like to have some zebun onions to plant in the gaps in between the parsnips. And again, the objective there is that the shallots are always much bigger than the parsnips, and so there's plenty of leaf area that's still exposed to the sun. So that's why I do those. And some North Holland Blood Red, which is another great salad onion when it's picked early, but it will bulb if you leave it for too long. So I kind of harvest in late May, is kind of the latest that I'd go with that. And I'll do my first potatoes. Now I've done loads and loads of early, much earlier potatoes in the past. Just Debbie and I, we don't eat very many potatoes now, so we're not doing any kind of super early potatoes, like early baking potatoes and things like that. We're just doing a small number of potatoes, you know, I think two tubs every few weeks, which is enough for us. And so we'll be starting our first batch off in this conservatory, stuck underneath the desk out of the way. Yeah, and then they go into the polytunnel under fleece at night, obviously. And then another batch of cauliflowers, and again it's these graffiti purple ones, which are absolutely fantastic. And as I say, every 2 weeks I'll do some of these graffiti cauliflowers, and I'll probably only, as I say, I'll do 4 and plant 3, and yeah, and that just keeps us going. And you know, they're just so healthy, they're so beautiful to look at, and they do so well, nice and early. I just don't think you can beat graffiti cauliflowers if you can kind of cope with the fact that they're bright purple. So in this video I probably mentioned grow lights far too many times, and to be honest, most of the things that I do you can do without grow lights. You just have to start things back in sort of September, October, November, overwinter them and things like that. Grow lights just make things a lot more fun, and yeah, I really like them. So if you want to find out more about grow lights, then take a look at my ebook. I'll put a link to that in the description below. I'll put a link to the section of the book on growing with lights. It's in the basics section of the ebook if you want to find it for yourself. And also at the start of the ebook there is a link to my Amazon store, and that links to some of the grow lights that I recommend. And I do also recommend that you look at my comments on those grow lights. They're not particularly amazing, but because Amazon doesn't give you very much space to put a comment in, but I have put comments in where I can, recommending, you know, specific things for specific scenarios. So yeah, take a look at that. And if you do buy it from that link from my Amazon store, then I do get like £2 or something for each time you do that. So yeah, buys me a cup of coffee. Anyway, so I think that is pretty much me done. This is 40 minutes, so this is a pretty long video. My name's Steve, this is the Seaside Kitchen Garden and Allotment channel, and I'll see you soon.